Yeah, absolutely. My name's Victoria Hester. I've been acting since I was 5 years old. I went on a field trip with my school to see the play Peter Pan. And my mom was actually late to it, but once she finally got there, we left and I was like, I'm gonna do that. My mom was like, those kids are homeschooled. And I was like, well, then I want to be homeschooled. So we started homeschooling the following year, and I got into community theater. I was living in Memphis at the time, started working there, and also doing some shows at a local high school that was nationally renowned for its theater program. And through the community theater, I met a lady who'd founded one of the agencies in Memphis at the time. So she helped me get in with that agency, and through them, I started doing some little shorts and some independent film, and I got my first big audition through that agent for the movie Walk the Line. And I actually booked it, which was amazing. And I worked on that. And after that, we started taking my career a lot more seriously, making trips out to California for pilot and episodic season, driving all over the nation for auditions. So I've been doing it ever since. So the Best Christmas Pageant Ever was actually the first show I ever did. I was 5 years old and I auditioned for Gladys Herdman, which is a member of the worst family in the whole history of the world. And I remember my mom coaching me for the audition, helping me get ready, helping me kind of get out of my head because it's a really like silly role, and I've never really been a silly person. Um, so it was definitely outside myself, and I think immediately a challenge in acting to see if this was something I wanted to do, if I was comfortable being uncomfortable. And I actually reprised the role 2 more times with the same theater. So I did it again when I was 6 and then again when I was 8. And I actually did it differently every single time. One time I was like trailer trash child. One time I was like a little goth child. So it was really fun getting to play with the same character multiple times and making a different choice each time I did it. I think it's very different from film acting, and I love them both, but very separately. So I would say on the stage it's very different because you have to act every emotion so large that the person in the back row of the audience can both see and hear you and know what's going on. So it's definitely a different style of acting, which I don't mind. As far as professionally, it's a lot harder to live doing theater, as it just does not pay nearly as equitable as film does. With film, you end up with those residuals, and so you might be able to make a career out of it and eventually garner enough income to where you can survive just doing that. Theater, you're going to be rooming with people for years. You're barely going to be making any money. I mean, it's hard enough just to find a production that pays. Most of them are kind of volunteer. And even the ones that do pay often pay like a stipend. So for 4 weeks, you might get $200. So that makes it really difficult to pursue when you have a part-time job or a full-time job or really anything going on, because it is a full-time job and one that may not compensate you. Film, it's a lot smaller. You just really have to rein it in. You have to be focused on a whole bunch of other aspects, including like keeping everything small, not moving too much, staying on your mark, things like that. But I find it to feel more realistic when performing. And like I said, you do get paid for your work in a way that is equitable, so it is easier to maintain that as a living.
Think they forgot?
The Ring of Fire.
Joaquin Phoenix, Reese Witherspoon, Walk the Line.
So I actually remember it quite vividly. I went in for the audition, and they actually had me reading for Roseanne Cash, which was a different role than the one I got. And I went in, and I don't believe there was a callback. I believe it was a singular audition. I went in, they had me read, they loved me, they had me stay. I might have read for producers or something like that. I believe they called more people into the room and had me read again. And at the end of it, the casting director came to me and she was like, I love you so much and I want to give you this part, but there's a huge issue, and that is that Roseanne Cash is a real person and you don't look like her at all. So we left thinking it was over, and this was kind of bizarre and unusual, but 4 months later, they called and said, hey, we forgot to cast a role. It's the role of Carlene Carter, and you do look exactly like her. They offered me that role without me actually reading for it. And then they called me back in. I did my fitting, and then in, I think, only 2 weeks, we started filming. So it was pretty awesome. I definitely think the way I perceive acting is really different because of when I started acting. There's been so much change in the system of hiring, really, and auditions since I started. So I have a really unique perspective where when I started, everything was in person. You went and saw the casting director for the audition. They might do a mix and match with you and other actors, so you'd be reading with other people. And occasionally you might be paired with one of the actual leads on the production just to test chemistry. At the time, you would go in and you would know every little girl in the room. They looked exactly like you, and you know all of their names, and you probably know who's going to book it too. Now everything is on tape, so there's very few in-person auditions remaining, and it's really changed the entire process. And so the biggest difference in my process now is I have to be worried about so many external factors outside of just my performance. So I think it's a lot harder to focus now when you're worrying about your hair and the lighting and your backdrop. Is it wrinkly? Is it good? Like, is your camera person doing a good job? Are they speaking too loud? Are they too close to the camera? So I find all of that to be really, really distracting. But as for my actual process, I start with the lines. I normally read through it about 3 times and then get to work on memorizing. I'm very lucky with that. It doesn't take me too long usually, just a few read-throughs, and I'm pretty good. And then I make sure I know it by rote, meaning I can speak the words very quickly with no emotion. And then I kind of center myself before my audition. I let the character drop in, and I make sure to have a good connection with my scene partner as well before I start. And then I kind of let it just show up. But just breaking in and getting representation, I think at the beginning of your career is maybe the hardest part. Making sure you have good headshots, making sure your resume looks professional. Now you need real footage as well, so getting that put together. And getting that representation is the hardest part. Once you have that, you can get your foot in the door, you can see the casting director, you can tape the audition, you can at least get started even if you're not booking. But until then, you're just kind of flopping around in the water, hoping something comes your way.
But you hurt my brother and my friend and countless others. I will not protect this piece of paper, but I will protect them.
So I'm facing a lot of struggles currently in my career, one of which being Georgia's right to work state, and I'm SAG-AFTRA, and being SAG-AFTRA, I can't work on non-union projects. So there's a bunch of projects that will film here and go non-union while they would be required to be union in other states. And they do that so that they can pay people less and make the production for cheaper. So for instance, you might have to pay an actor $1,000 for the day in LA, and then they might see residuals on how many times that commercial streams. But the same commercial can film in Georgia and pay somebody about $100 for the day and nothing beyond that. And I'm not even allowed to work on those projects. So that makes things difficult. And then a lot of acting roles are outsourced to LA actors, so they're flying them in to perform, and a lot of times local talent is either not being considered or barely being considered. You might have a casting director for the same roles both in LA and in Georgia, and they may never even ask the Georgia casting director about their choices. The other thing is real footage becomes really hard, so there's not a lot of productions I can work on. So over time, my resume has gone stale, and now you're expected to have footage on your profile as well, and I'm kind of aging out of the footage I have. Most of the footage I have isn't even incredibly professional. It's mostly student films I've worked on that went with a SAG student contract. but maintaining that footage I find to be really, really difficult when there's not many productions I can work on. Obviously, the strike was a barrier as well, but in addition to that, I've seen the number of auditions in Atlanta go down severely since I've moved here in the last 5 years. My first year living here, I would have around 9 auditions a week, which was incredibly difficult to maintain. That's like more than one every day, but now I'm lucky to get one every 3 months, which is definitely disheartening.